Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we discuss topics related to sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacy in an effort to promote compliance and increase quality. The Pharmacy Inspection Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, delivering quality and meaningful conversations and discussions about our pharmacy industry and the critical role pharmacists play in our healthcare systems. Learn more at pharmacypodcast.com. Please welcome your hosts, Bryan Prince and Seth DePasquale.
Hello and welcome to all of our compounding friends and colleagues, and welcome to another episode of the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we discuss all things compounding in an effort to increase quality and safety in the compounding industry. Thank you for joining us on this milestone episode number 20. I tell you, time flies when you're having fun, and this podcast adventure has definitely been a lot of fun for Seth and I, as well as I hope it has been for you, our listeners. Let me first apologize to those of you who were anticipating a new podcast episode last week because, to say the least, it has been a busy week for everyone. We had two separate guests to interview, and both had to cancel at the last minute because their pharmacy's business demanded their time, which we certainly understand. Also, Seth has been busy in the clean room because his compounding season is galloping forward, pun intended. And I have 9 lab design projects going on at the same time. So there's no doubt that the life of an entrepreneur is a busy one. We know that all of you pharmacy owners, business owners, and everybody involved in making the daily operations happen, you're all so super busy. So we want to let you know that we appreciate your time in joining us week after week. When Seth and I decided to launch the podcast, we'd originally intended to release an episode every few weeks, maybe one a month. And we got having so much fun that, we were interviewing guests and we just started releasing an episode every week. And our goal was to stay as consistent as possible. But like I said earlier, the life of an entrepreneur is busy. And so we appreciate you, our audience, understanding that it doesn't always happen that way. Regardless, this week's episode is going to be a conversation between Seth and I on a technical issue because we want to make sure that you, our audience of industry professionals, take away some piece of valuable information that will help improve the quality of your compounding pharmacy's business. And so with that being said, let's dive into this week's topic. Seth, you just released a new article on the pharmacyinspection.com website titled Ending Confusion, Endotoxin to Endospores. I have to admit that honestly, I didn't know the difference between the two, and so I enjoyed, as always, your meticulous and amusing explanation and writing style. Seth, so I have 3 starting questions, and I'll let you start to unpack these. Number 1, what are the differences between endotoxins and endospores? Number 2, why is it important to know the differences between endotoxins and endospores? And number 3, how do we effectively kill endotoxins and endospores?
Hey, Bryan, great question. And like Bryan said, I just wrote about this on the website. I'll refer to the article a little bit here and there, but also I think I have probably even some more thoughts on the topic. So first, let me just say, like Bryan also said, it's been a busy last few weeks for Bryan and I, and I'm sure for everybody else. Bryan's pun intended joke of my busy season is galloping away. So yeah, it is the horse breeding season officially as of February 15th, I believe. And that's what we do. That is everything that I do is make sterile compounds for breeding horses, either helping them ovulate or keep them in foal or even out of heat. So yeah, we're in full swing, and I just have not stopped for the last 2 weeks. So it is really busy. Anyway, so let's get back to the questions. So Brian's first question, what is the difference between endotoxins and endospores? Well, right off the bat, the biggest thing is that they're really they're from two different kinds of bacteria all together. So, one is from a gram-negative bacteria typically, and another one's from a gram-positive. And the gram-negative, there's endotoxin in the makeup of the cell wall, and it's the part of the cell wall that's made up of lipopolysaccharides. And even if the cell is completely destroyed, endotoxin is broken up and distributed amongst everything else that it's in, and it still can have activity in the human body as a pyrogen. And if you don't know, pyrogen is just another word for a fever, basically. So it can have an activity and get your immune system working and in full swing, and the immunocompromised, that's of course not a good thing. If your immune system isn't working and you have something foreign in there, that could be a very bad end to your day. So, endospores, on the other hand, are typically from gram-positive bacteria, and I maybe said that wrong. Not from gram-positive bacteria. They actually are gram-positive bacteria that have been kind of put in starvation mode, and they turn into a spore. So a spore is basically it's another stage of the life cycle that, if they're ever in less desirable conditions than what they would typically thrive in, they can do this whole really cool, neat trick where they become a spore and extremely resistant to being killed. So yeah, really interesting. So on to your next question. Why are each of these so important? And, for different reasons, they're really important. The endotoxin is really important because anything that we're reusing in the clean room, glassware, or even washing our hands, anything that comes in contact with water, there's a chance for endotoxin to be present. And, if we're not taking care of that prior to it being exposed to the product or the compound, then that could be a real issue. There are very fine lines there are endotoxin limits that we have to take in consideration when we're talking about injections, and those endotoxin limits are different whether we're talking about injection that might be going just in the muscle or into the spine. So obviously if it's an intrathecal injection, there's no immune system there, and you really have to be careful about any kind of foreign material getting into the spinal cord, because anything can be fairly disastrous for us. So depending on what that is, we can kind of figure out what the endotoxin limit is and do a little math calculation. That's all on pharmacyinspection.com under my post, Ending Confusion, Endotoxins to Endospores. So check that out to get the calculation correct. But the other thing with endospores is that that's also a really prevalent bacteria found in pretty much everywhere. Gram-positive bacteria are the majority of what we're going to be dealing with, contending with when we're inside the clean room. Comes from people, comes from soil, comes from it's everywhere. It's fairly pervasive. But that's not to say that every gram-positive bacteria is a spore-forming bacteria. There are definitely certain bacteria that are spore-forming and some that are not. It just happens to be that they're all gram-positive bacteria. So what we have to kind of look out for there is that when we're in our clean room, there's obviously going to be some bacteria in your clean room. That's just the nature of it. When we're bringing materials into the clean room and people are going to be in the clean room, there's going to be bacteria. And that's okay as long as we have control over the amount of bacteria that we're bringing in. So with endospores, you really have to think about, okay, so they come from gram-positive bacteria. If I'm doing my environmental sampling, I can kind of see what is in my clean room and what bacteria are typically present. And then if you're sending that environmental sampling off to be identified, you're able to see whether or not those are spore-forming gram-positive bacteria in the clean room. And if they are, there's definitely ways to take care of that. Or better yet, there's ways to figure out maybe where they're coming from and see if we could prevent them from coming in the first place. Again, like I alluded to, that the fact that people and materials are coming in and out of the clean room, it's fairly it's very difficult to say that there's going to be no bacteria present in the clean room at all. But the thing there is that we want to limit that as much as possible, through good gowning practices, through good hand washing technique, and just generally good aseptic technique in general, and good training for when we're in the clean room and not moving around really fast or jumping up and down or anything like that. You just want to be slow moving in the clean room, not making any excessive movements very quickly. The faster we move, the more particles we shed as people. So being mindful of that sort of stuff will definitely help contain some of the bacteria. But back to the point of the spores, if we do have spores in there, there are definitely ways to get rid of spores. Which brings me to the last question of how do we kill each of these things, or in the case of the endotoxin, how do we deactivate it so it's not going to have any activity? And each of those is a different answer, frankly, and it depends on what we're talking about. So if we're talking about endospores and them being in the clean room, obviously some of the typical methods that maybe we think of for sterilization are not going to work for in the clean room. We can't make the entire clean room into an autoclave or pack it up and put it in an oven to use heat of some kind to kill the endospores. Although that does work. You can kill endospores using an autoclave. However, like I said, you just can't use that trick for bacteria inside the clean room. So there's actually very specific things that can be used, disinfectants that are effective against endospores, and they're called sporicides. And sporicides are basically made up of hydrogen peroxide and acetic acid, or a combination thereof. And acetic acid, of course, is just vinegar. So anytime you have that really strong smell of vinegar in the clean room, that's what that is. That's your sporicide going in and killing all the endospores on the walls and floors, if there are any. So, those two chemicals are able to break past the very thick coating of the endospore to actually kill the bacteria itself. So, just to talk really quick about a particular type of clean that's very effective against killing a really large percentage percentage of the bacteria on your surfaces inside the clean room is called a triple clean, which is a clean with 2 disinfectants followed up by with a sporicide. And so let me clarify one thing there. We have disinfectants that each of those, it honestly could be the same disinfectant that you're using. Typically, I think it is the same disinfectant you're using twice in a row. However, you have to observe and be mindful of the contact times. If the package tells you that you have to have a contact time of 3 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, you have to observe that for all the surfaces in your clean room before you start the next disinfectant. And then again too with the sporicide. So the sporicide, those typically have anywhere from 3 to 10 minute contact time, where you have to just let it sit on the surface to actually have all the full activity that it's able to do. And typically with those are pretty corrosive chemicals, the sporicides that is. So you'll want to rinse that either with sterile IPA or sterile water, just to get that residue off the surface so it doesn't damage the surface itself. So that's how you get rid of the endospores. Now, endotoxins, on the other hand, again, like I said at the beginning, those are a part of the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria. And even if you manage to destroy the gram-negative bacteria through cleaning or whatever, it could still, endotoxin can still be present. So how do you deactivate the endotoxin so it doesn't have any activity? And really the best way to do that is with dry heat, temperatures in excess of, at 250 degrees Celsius for a minimum of 30 minutes. And let me just put a little asterisk there. That all depends on, how much you're putting into the oven, what you've tested. Theoretically, you're testing each of those objects that you're putting in the oven to make sure that it actually did have an effective kill, using either biological indicators or endotoxin challenge vials, to know whether or not your cycles are actually doing the job of deactivating and killing, sterilizing, and depyrogenating whatever materials you're putting in there. So really important in whether we're using an autoclave or a dry heat oven, that we're actually using biological indicators to verify that cycle, to make sure it actually did kill whatever we're trying to kill. So that's it. This stuff isn't not too difficult to understand once it's broken down and you realize that, endotoxin comes from water bacteria, typically gram-negative bacteria. It's the cell wall. It's a part of the cell wall of the gram-negative bacteria. And then gram-positive bacteria are able to do this really cool thing called forming a spore, where they become really resistant and they get a hard shell around them and protected, and really resistant to chemicals and exposure to heat and all this stuff. So they're hard to kill. But that's it. It's not too bad to wrap your head around once you understand it, and once it's broken down. So yeah, Bryan, what else you got?
Seth, the information that you've brought here today for us, and which is that you write about on the pharmacyinspection.com website, is offered up and written in a style that is easy to understand. And oftentimes I've noticed that it is best practices and offers corrective action strategies. And if they're implemented, will certainly lead to a more safe and quality product for the patient, which is always certainly, our number one strategy. I genuinely appreciate the fact that you are a lifetime learner, and that's because I can tell that's one of the reasons why our personalities have such a kinship for each other. And I've said many times in conferences to PICs, technicians, pharmacy owners that implementing best practices are sometimes going to create a culture change. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to implement a positive company culture, whether it's for the sake of safety and quality or for the sake of the company overall. And let me see if I can just dissect that for a moment for the audience here. If I were going to relate culture to that of constructing a house and create some sort of metaphor around that, then company culture is the foundation for which everything else builds on. I've developed a personal philosophy of business called the 3 C's, those being culture, customer, and cash flow. We start with the culture, and then every process or process improvement runs through the 3 C's filter. Number 1, does it align with our culture? Number 2, does it benefit the customer? And number 3, does it have a positive impact on cash flow? And so those are just, some of my personal philosophies that I brought forth. And without getting too deep into those, personal business philosophies, let me just say that management has got to set forth a positive culture for quality and change. If your business has a consistent employee turnover, just as an example, I would say that you really need to examine your company's culture. By the same token, if management does not, quote unquote, buy in to the changes behind USP standards, then don't expect your staff to miraculously change the quality standards of your compounded products. Culture starts at the top and trickles down, not the other way around. And I could probably go on and on standing on the soapbox, but I will politely step off and say thank you again to our audience for this week, and I send you wishes for enduring success both this week and this year and forever, and remind you to keep raising the bar.